Paul Hawksbee, Charlie Baker here on talkSPORT. Understandably, a lot of column inches in your papers today around Ange Postecoglou and his plight at Spurs. And
I've even stopped messaging you on a Sunday or a Saturday now, Paul.
There may be
I just know to hold back now because it's getting a bit depressing now for you.
It was a tough afternoon for a Tottenham fan. I was there, of course, and it felt like a new low. But there is a feeling he's getting so slightly hung out to dry at the moment, going out there apologising for the lack of signings and making excuses for people that maybe he shouldn't. But the flip side of that is Conte, and we all know what happened to him. Maybe that's why Postecoglou's still in a job. Tom Allnutt in the Times today has been crunching the numbers. I do sense Daniel Levy is more interested in balance sheet than team sheets. I'm sure they made interesting reading for him. Tom's also part of the excellent Tottenham Way podcast with Marcus Buckland, Dan Kilpatrick and Tom Barkley.
Oh, yeah, lovely.
Good afternoon, Tom.
Hello, Tom.
Hi guys, thanks for the plug. Very kind.
Yeah, it's good. I know. I always enjoy it. Marcus was absolutely mad on the last one. He said he was bring back Glenn Hoddle was what he went with yesterday. I think.
Glenn Hoddle, Harry Redknapp.
Harry Redknapp went through. Yeah, it was like the wild geese,
the fun days.
Not that these guys aren't fine football men and
bring
managers.
Bring back Ozzy Ardiles.
Well, it was. I mean, it was cryogenically freezing. Other ex-managers, So anyway, we move on. Yeah, there were some very telling numbers. There probably wasn't great timing in light of everything that's going on at Spurs. That some of the figures that did emerge last week, the Deloitte Money League figures, were pretty damning on the Tottenham front. And you do hear a lot of fans of other clubs say, well, he went out and he bought Solanke, he's spent money on the team. What more could he do? But I think the numbers you've put in your piece today are quite telling.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in some ways that Deloitte Money League was probably music to the club's ears. You know, I mean, they're the 9th richest club in the world in terms of revenue. Nicely sort of sandwiched between Liverpool and Chelsea, I think, just above Borussia Dortmund and Atletico Madrid. You know, big clubs who have done very well in the Champions League in recent years. I guess the big question is, why are Spurs not performing like the 9th biggest club in the world? You know, that kind of collection of teams that you see in that sort of top 10 are all sort of Champions League regulars, and not just that, but many of them are kind of getting to the quarterfinals and last 16 of the Champions League at least, you know, fairly regularly. Whereas Spurs, you know, 15th in the Premier League right now, can't buy a win, look like they're sort of worrying about relegation and can't sign a player this window, you know, and there's obviously a real disconnect, you know, between where the club is off the pitch and where they're on the pitch. And, you know, I think we all know, don't we, that Daniel Levy has done a lot of very, you know, stellar work at Spurs in terms of growing the business. You know, we don't need to repeat all the things in the stadium, the training ground, even kind of getting Spurs to be a kind of European regular, you know, from where they were in the 90s. You know, all of that has happened during his tenure. I guess the question is, what have they done since they sort of got to that Champions League final in 2019, since they sort of got to that pinnacle almost? Have they kicked on? You know, I always remember Pochettino using that opening of the new stadium. Everyone was sort of, you know, feeling very chummy, and everyone was hugging and, I don't know, singing Tottenham songs. And Pochettino sort of came into the press conference afterwards, and he sort of took us all aback a bit, because he sort of struck this slightly more sort of, I don't know about a warning, you know. He sort of said, let's start acting like a big club as well. You know, this is a moment where the club needs to start acting like a big team. And that was in sort of, you know, 2018, 2019. And what have they done since then? You know, the spending in terms of transfers has been fairly mediocre. You know, they're 5th over the last 10 years in the Premier League for sort of net spending on transfers, which I guess, you know, you'd say is about where Spurs are in terms of their sort of league table finish generally. But in terms of wages is the big one, you know, and that's what we were looking at really in the Times today. It's what Spurs spend on wages as a proportion of their revenue, you know. So, and if you compare that to the other 20 richest clubs in that Deloitte list, they're bottom of that table. According to Swiss Ramble, the finance account on X, they're bottom of the Premier League table for 2022, 2023 in terms of how much of their revenue they spend on salaries. You know, and ultimately this is the big thing. You know, you guys will know that it's one thing to sort of spend big money on transfer fees, you know, and you know, Solanke is a good example, you know, spending 65 million on a striker. That's not a small amount, is it? But to actually attract the kind of best players, the real sort of quality players that are going to get you to title challenges and to the last stage of the Champions League, you've got to pay big salaries. That's just the reality, and it's an open secret in football, in the transfer industry, that Tottenham simply are not prepared to pay the salaries that the big clubs and the big players want.
I spoke to an agent once. There was a player who's in demand. Tottenham were in the mix, and for reasons it might give the identity away, which you don't want to do, was interested in coming to Tottenham because some of the personnel there he had a relationship with. The wages were miles off compared with the other teams in the mix. And they were told, well, it's incentive-based. And the agent was thinking, yeah, a win bonuses for a team that never wins anything. That's quite a tough sell for my client. Ultimately, the player went elsewhere. So
was that Pochettino moment the moment? Do you think,
was. No,
Tom?
It is.
Paul?
It absolutely is, Tom.
To quote Lin-Manuel Miranda, did you throw away your shot?
I think we did. I mean, I remember Adrian taking me to task on air, but I said at that moment, we could have been a contender. We could have been Liverpool. That was the sliding doors moment to build on what happened then. But I think you may have said in your piece today, the net spend the season after they got to the Champions League final was $4 million, Tom.
Minus $4 million. Minus $4 million.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So you're
being overly generous.
I missed the minus. Obviously, I couldn't deal with it psychologically. But that is nuts, isn't it, really? And it was such a way. And I think if you get him in a quiet moment, he probably would admit that was a misstep.
Yeah, I think that team, even when they got to their Champions League final, if you remember that season, they were already on the kind of downward spiral, weren't they, in that season? They sort of clawed their way to the final of the Champions League, but actually in the league, they were already tailing off. And there was a sense of that kind of really good collection of players, Dele Alli, Harry Kane, Eriksen, all of that lot. They were just starting to kind of maybe come down a bit off their peak, and I think a really sort of forward-thinking, ambitious club in that situation would have started to take some big decisions. You look at what Real Madrid do, you look at what Manchester City do, maybe Liverpool, they sense when players are starting to come to their end, and they almost kind of predict it. You have to accept that sometimes a player will leave and give you a good season or two somewhere else, but you have to say, okay, for the future, it's worth planning and taking some big decisions. And I think Tottenham did the opposite in that situation. They got so carried away with Pochettino overachieving and delivering results that, to be honest, the financial outlay didn't necessarily merit, that they thought, okay, we can keep doing this. We can carry on sort of finding gems in the rough like Harry Kane, and not paying the big money and the big salaries. And we can still, finish in the top 2 or 3 in the Premier League. We can still go far in the Champions League. But we all know that that's not the reality, and it shines a real positive light, I think, on Pochettino's era, doesn't it, in a way, looking back now, it's quite something when you look at the last 3 managers, and maybe this will be encouraging for Postecoglou, isn't it, that, Conte, top of the league in Italy, Mourinho, second in Turkey, and Nuno, basically manager of the season here in the Premier League, that it's not obviously just the managers. And all 3 of those, by the way, had reasons for leaving. And I think, the fans didn't regret their departures one bit, but it does suggest that there's more to this problem at Spurs than just Ange Postecoglou right now.
Absolutely. Tom, good to talk to you.
Thanks, Tom.
Appreciate your time.
Really great.
Tom Allnutt, there you can read his piece in today's Times. I think very quickly, at the core of it, I don't think he's that interested in sporting excellence. I mean, if you look at some of the other owners out there, and there are no guarantees with any owner, and Andy will tell you that Chelsea's a basket case, but at the core of it, they are the owners of a sports franchise and they want to win.
They want success,
not to make money, but for the glory.
Yeah.
Bill Foley at Bournemouth owns a sporting franchise, a number of sporting. He wants that. He wants to see the teams he invests in do well from a sporting point of view. There's a kind of reflected glory in that, and I'm sure there's a bit of ego. But look at the job he's doing at Bournemouth. The Fenway
Group,
John Henry and those guys. They own the Red Sox.
So
there is something about that, and I don't sense that. I never have sensed that.
No.
Look, this is a minor thing. I was sitting close to him at the Brighton versus Tottenham game, a few rows back down at the Amex, and Tottenham won that game 1-0. And they were in a kind of broadly in a sort of director's box area. I went with a mate of mine, and we scored. Harry Kane scored, and I was up.
Yeah, of course.
And it quickly sat down again, didn't want to annoy everybody. And I watched Tony Bloom throughout the game. Tony was up and down like a yo-yo.
Into it, yeah.
Like he'd bought his ticket. And he was so... And I didn't see anything from the chairman.
Yeah.
When we had chances,
so
I didn't see a flinch. He would argue he's not there to be a fanboy. He's there to be...
Yeah.
But
it creates a misunderstanding of what what the fans want.
I know.
I think because you don't feel it yourself.
It's a minor thing, but it was a real kind of microcosm of two different chairmen with two different takes on what they want from the football club. It's anyway, as we said, I said to the guys yesterday, we're in an unhappy marriage at the moment. We won't leave because we love the kids. He won't leave because he doesn't want to lose the house. So we're just going to have to cohabit basically, and not get in each other's way too much.
So, I know we've got a break, but what do you want him to do? Go and spend 150 million quid on players?
No, I don't want him to put the club in financial hardship, but there's so much headroom still for him to go out and spend give players the sort of wages to attract top players that will allow them to move on, and you'd still be nowhere near PSR. No. We've got a lot of headroom.
Okay.
Anyway.
Paul Hawksbee and Andy Jacobs, Monday to Friday afternoons 1 till 4 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.